William, Prince of Wales, pledge my loyalty to you, and faith and truth I will bear unto you, as your liege man of life and limb.
Balmoral, late summer. The light doing what Scottish light does in August. Soft, long, the kind that makes everything look quieter than it is. The children are outside, the adults are nearby, and for a moment, it looks like exactly what it is supposed to look like. A family, at their most private, at their most unguarded. And then a child opens his mouth. What he says to Prince Louis lands in the air like something physical. The adults go still. The kind of still that happens when everyone in a space simultaneously understands that something has just changed. William hears it, and the man who has spent his entire life choosing the institution over instinct stops choosing. Everything changes in the next 60 seconds. Let's find out the full story of what happened. Balmoral, the estate where the masks come off. There is a version of the royal family that the world sees, a formal, managed, presented through the careful choreography of public occasions where every gesture is considered and every expression is calibrated, and the distance between what is being felt and what is being shown is maintained with the professional discipline of people who have been doing this their entire lives. And then there is Balmoral. Balmoral is where that version gets put down. Not completely, not in every corner of every room. These are people who carry their public identity so deeply into their private lives that separating the two is probably not fully possible for any of them, but to a degree that nowhere else in their existence allows. Balmoral is the closest thing this family has to a place where the performance can rest. It has always been this way. The estate in Aberdeenshire that Queen Victoria fell in love with in the 1840s, and that has been the royal family's Scottish retreat ever since, carries a character that is entirely its own within the geography of the monarchy. It is not a working palace. It is not a formal residence in the constitutional sense. It is a home, or the closest approximation to one that a family whose every property is technically institutional can maintain. The informality of Balmoral is the thing that makes it matter so much to understanding the events that occurred there. Because informality in this context does not mean relaxed boundaries or reduced awareness of the dynamics between people. It means the opposite. It means that the managed distances that public life enforces between these people are close. The careful positioning that governs how they exist alongside each other in formal settings gives way to the closer, less managed, more genuinely human proximity of people who are actually related and actually living in the same space for an extended period. And closer proximity means that the things usually kept at a manageable distance become close enough to touch. The specific gathering at Balmoral that produced the incident involving Prince Louis was not a formal royal occasion. It was the kind of extended family presence that the estate accommodates during the summer months. Multiple generations, multiple households, the working royals and the people adjacent to them occupying the same grounds with the kind of overlapping daily proximity that the rest of the year's managed separateness prevents. The children are always a particular dimension of Balmoral, because children do not perform in the way adults learn to perform inside this world. They have not yet developed the sophisticated awareness of institutional hierarchy and the personal restraint that awareness produces. They exist in the genuine, unmanaged way that children exist. They play together. They compete with each other. They say the things that occur to them without the filtering mechanism that royal life eventually installs in the people it shapes. That quality of unmanaged childhood honesty is usually one of the things that makes Balmoral the estate it is. The sound of children across the grounds. The reminder that underneath the institution there are actual human beings at the beginning of their lives who have not yet fully understood the weight of what those lives will require of them. It is also, on certain occasions, the quality that produces moments no amount of institutional management can fully prevent. George, Charlotte, and Louis have spent summers at Balmoral since they were old enough to travel there. It is part of their childhood in the specific and irreplaceable way that recurring places embed themselves in the emotional geography of the years you spend in them. They know the grounds. The particular quality of Scottish summer mornings. The rhythm of days that are different from the managed schedule of their London lives. Balmoral is, in a real sense, one of the places where they are most themselves. And the children who are at Balmoral on occasions involving the extended family network of the current reign are not only theirs. The gathering that produced this incident included children whose connection to the royal family runs through a different part of its current configuration. whose presence at Balmoral reflects the accommodation of Charles's personal relationships within the estate's summer occupation that the current reign has established as part of its character. Camilla's family has been part of Balmoral summers in the period of her marriage to Charles, the specific individuals, the specific children, the degree to which that presence has been managed, and the degree to which it has been allowed to become simply part of the landscape of the estate's summer use. These are details that have never been fully documented publicly, but that sources close to the family describe as a feature of the Balmoral experience that William has had complicated feelings about for longer than this specific incident has been known about. Because Balmoral is where masks come off. It is where the managed acceptance of Camilla's place in the family and the genuine private feelings of the people who have been required to extend that acceptance have always been closest to each other, closest to the surface. And it is where, on a specific late summer afternoon in the long Scottish light, the surface finally broke. Not through anything William did, not through any institutional decision or deliberate act of position drawing, through a child's words, directed by Louis, in the unmanaged, unfiltered, revealing way that children communicate the things they have absorbed from the world around them. And what those words revealed about the world around Camilla's grandson is the question that sent the next 60 seconds in a direction nobody at Balmoral that afternoon was prepared for. The insult, what was said, who heard it, and why it could not be ignored. Children say things. That is the first thing to establish. Because the instinct when an incident like this surfaces is to immediately reach for the most extreme interpretation. To frame a child's words as a calculated act of deliberate malice that requires the full weight of adult consequence. That framing is wrong, and it is not where this story lives. Children say things they have absorbed, things they have heard in the rooms they grow up in, things that were never directed at them as lessons, but that entered their understanding through the particular osmosis of childhood. The overheard conversation, the tone of an adult discussing someone they do not fully respect. The casual aside is that an adult forgot to moderate because they forgot a child was in the vicinity, or because they simply did not think it mattered. Children absorb all of it, and they reproduce it, in the unfiltered, contextless way of people who have not yet developed the judgment to understand what should and should not be said, and to whom. What Camilla's grandson said to Prince Louis was of this type. Absorbed, reproduced, without the full understanding of its weight. But without the full understanding of its weight does not mean without weight. The specific nature of the words has not been fully documented in any public account. Sources describe the content in terms that are consistent across multiple tellings without reproducing the specific language. What they describe is an insult that touched on Louis's position, on his place within the family, on the specific dimension of who he is in the hierarchy of the institution he was born into. Not a generic childhood unkindness. The kind that children everywhere direct at each other and that passes without lasting consequence because it is about nothing more than the temporary dynamics of a particular afternoon. This was specific, targeted, in a way that required knowledge of the specific sensitivities of Louis's position that a child would only have if they had been hearing adults discuss those sensitivities in language that eventually made its way into the child's own vocabulary. That is the dimension of the insult that made it impossible to process as simply a child being unkind. It was a child being a mirror, reflecting back something that had been in the room around him. Something that revealed, in the unfiltered language of a young person who did not understand the full implications of what he was saying, an attitude that existed in the adult world he was growing up in. And that attitude was directed at the son of the future king. Louis is the youngest of William and Catherine's 3 children. He is also the most publicly uninhibited, the child whose personality has been most visible in the rare public moments where the Wales children have appeared, the one whose expressions and reactions and the particular quality of his engagement with the world around him have made him, among the people who follow the royal family, the child who feels most immediately human, most present, most themselves. He is 6 years old. He is growing up inside an institution that will shape everything about his life in ways he cannot yet understand. He is doing that growing up in a family that carries more historical weight and more personal complexity than most families accumulate across generations. And someone said something to him that used that complexity as a weapon, however imperfectly, however unconsciously, However, the child saying it did not fully understand what he was deploying. The people who heard it did understand. Sources describe the immediate atmosphere following the words as one of those specific charged silences that occur when something has been said that everyone present knows cannot be processed as a normal social moment. The adults in the vicinity registered it simultaneously. The particular collective stillness of people who are deciding in real time how to respond to something that the standard social responses to children's unkindness do not adequately address. Because the standard response to a child being unkind at a family gathering is a gentle adult intervention, a quiet word, a redirection, the managed de-escalation of a minor incident before it becomes anything more than that. The standard response assumes the unkindness is random, unspecific, the product of childhood dynamics rather than the expression of attitudes absorbed from adults. This was not that, and the adults who heard it knew it was not that. Among those adults was William, and here is what makes the moment the pivot point of this entire story. William has spent his entire public life choosing the managed response over the instinctive one, the institutional over the personal, the considered over the immediate. It is perhaps the defining characteristic of how he has operated in every difficult situation his life has placed him in. The discipline of the performance over the rawness of what is actually being felt. He heard what was said to his son, and for the first time in the public record of his behavior at Balmoral, in a family setting, in the presence of people who were watching him for exactly the reaction that the institution would normally require him to suppress. He did not choose the managed response, not because he lost control, not in the way that discipline fails under acute pressure and produces something regrettable, the opposite of that. With complete control, with the full awareness of what he was doing and what it communicated and what it would mean for everything that followed, he responded as a father, without the institutional filter, and the response was not a quiet word. It was not a gentle redirection of the children and a discreet conversation with the relevant adults later in the day. It was immediate, visible, and completely unambiguous to everyone who witnessed it. The 60 seconds that followed those words changed the character of what Balmoral means and who controls it. And they started with a father looking at his son and then looking at the child who had spoken, and deciding that this was where the patience ended. William's response, the father and the future king, act as one. There is a version of William that the institution has spent decades constructing, patient, measured, the future king who absorbs the difficult things and processes them through the appropriate channels and emerges on the other side of them, having maintained the surfaces that the monarchy depends on. The man who has sat through more uncomfortable situations than most people will ever encounter and responded to each of them with the particular discipline of someone who understands that his reactions are never just personal. They are institutional. They carry the weight of what he represents as well as what he feels. That version of William was present at Balmoral that afternoon. And then he heard what was said to Louis. And something in the carefully constructed architecture of that version briefly and completely gave way. Not to anger in the uncontrolled sense, not to the kind of reaction that loses itself in the moment and produces something that has to be managed and apologized for afterward. Something more focused than anger, more deliberate. The particular quality of a response that is fully conscious of what it is doing and has decided to do it anyway because the calculation has shifted and the thing that previously made restraint the right response is no longer operative. Louis's face is the detail that sources who were present keep returning to when they describe what they witnessed. The specific expression of a 6-year-old child who has been hit with something he does not fully understand, but that he understands enough to feel. The confusion of a child who knows that something has just been said about him that was not kind, who is looking at the people around him for the signal that tells him how to process it, who finds his father's face first, and finds his father already in motion. William moved toward the children, not rushed, not with the contained physical energy of someone preventing themselves from doing something more than they are doing, with the particular deliberateness of someone who knows exactly where they are going and what they intend to do when they get there. He addressed Camilla's grandson directly, not the adults, not a general redirection of the situation toward a calmer place. The child, specifically and without the cushioning that adult responses to children's behavior normally include. in terms that were clear enough that every adult in the vicinity understood what was being said, even if the child himself only partially processed it. Sources describe what William said as brief, precise, carrying the quality of someone who has decided that clarity matters more than comfort in this moment. The words themselves have not been fully reported, but the substance, as described by those who heard it, addressed two things simultaneously. The first was the specific behavior, what had been said and why it was not acceptable. Not as a general statement about kindness, in terms that were specific to the context, to who Louis is, to the specific nature of what had been said and the specific reason it was wrong to say it. The second was something larger, a statement about the boundaries of this space, about what would and would not be tolerated within it, about the understanding that Balmoral, whatever its history and whatever the arrangements that have governed its use, is a place where certain things do not happen to William's children. The adults heard the second part as clearly as the child heard the first. Camilla was present. Sources describe her physical response to William's intervention in terms that suggest the weight of what was occurring landed on her with full force. The particular quality of someone watching a situation escalate in a direction they cannot stop, and whose inability to stop it is itself communicating something about the limits of their influence in this space. She did not intervene in William's response to the child. She did not attempt to moderate it or redirect it or apply the authority of her position as the child's grandmother to soften what was happening. Whether that absence of intervention was a choice or a recognition that intervention was not available to her in this specific dynamic is a distinction that sources do not fully resolve. But her stillness in the moment was noted by everyone present. Catherine's position during the incident and its immediate aftermath has been described by sources as one of contained presence. She was there. She witnessed what happened. And her response to William's intervention was not to moderate it, but to align with it in the particular physical and social way that the Wales household aligns. Quietly, without drama, but completely. The adults around the incident divided in the way that the adults around every significant moment in this family's ongoing story have divided in recent months, into those who aligned with William's response and those who found it excessive or uncomfortable or difficult to navigate in the specific relational dynamics of that particular gathering. The division was not dramatic. It did not produce a second incident on top of the first, but it was visible, and it mapped onto the division that has been visible in every previous significant moment. Between the people whose primary loyalty in this family is to the Wales household and the people whose primary loyalty runs through the configuration that Charles's reign has created. William noted the division in the way he notes everything, without making his noting of it visible in the moment. But the response to what was said to Louis did not end with the words he addressed to Camilla's grandson. It continued into decisions made in the hours and days that followed, decisions that used the formal and informal authority available to the future king over the estate where his son had been insulted to draw a line that his words in that moment had announced, but his subsequent actions made permanent. The father had spoken. Now, the future king moved, taking control of Balmoral, what it means and how he did it. Words in the moment are one thing. Actions in the days that follow are another. And what William did in the period after the incident at Balmoral is the part of this story that moves it from a significant family confrontation into something with a different and more permanent character. Because William did not leave it at the conversation with the child, he did not process the incident through the usual mechanisms of family management and allowed the estate to return to the configuration it had before the afternoon that changed it. He made decisions, specific ones, about Balmoral, about who exercises authority over its use and under what conditions and with whose input. He took control. To understand what that means requires understanding something about Balmoral's governance that most public accounts of the estate do not address directly. Balmoral is not a crown estate property in the formal sense. It is privately owned. It was purchased by Prince Albert in 1852 and has been in the family's private ownership since. That private ownership status has always given the monarch a degree of personal authority over its use that goes beyond the constitutional arrangements governing the formal royal residences. It is, in the most practical sense, a private family home, subject to the decisions of the people who own and inherit it. The question of who exercises authority over Balmoral's use in the current period has the same character as all of the other questions about the distribution of practical authority inside the palace. Formally, it belongs to Charles. Practically, it has been operating in the same transitional space that everything else in the institutional management of the monarchy has been operating in, with William's influence expanding into areas that his formal position does not yet technically cover, but that the reality of the approaching transition has been making increasingly available to him. The incident with Louis provided William with something he has used effectively before: an occasion, a specific concrete event that justifies the exercise of authority in terms that are difficult to argue against. Not a general institutional preference about how Balmoral should be managed. A specific response to a specific thing that happened on the estate involving his son. An event that gives the assertion of control a justification that transcends the politics of palace power dynamics and lands in the more unassailable territory of a father protecting his child. The specific nature of the control William asserted has been described by sources in careful terms. Not a formal transfer of governance, not a documented institutional change that produces a public record of exactly what changed and when. In the way that William's most significant institutional moves have been characterized throughout the year. Of events this story is part of. It happened through communication, through the direct expression of his position to the people whose conduct at Balmoral produced the incident, through the establishment of conditions of what the future use of the estate by the people adjacent to Camilla's family would and would not look like going forward, and through the specific involvement of the estate's management in understanding who has the authority to determine those conditions. Sources familiar with the estate's management describe a shift in how directions about certain aspects of Balmoral's summer use were received and actioned in the period following the incident. A shift that reflects a change in whose preferences are being treated as determinative on the relevant questions, not dramatic, not announced, but real in the practical sense of decisions being made differently, and by reference to a different authority than the one that governed them before. Camilla's family's access to and presence at Balmoral in the current and future configuration is the specific matter around which the shift is most visible. The informal accommodation of their presence as part of the estate's summer use. The assumption that it had apparently been operating that Balmoral's summer gatherings would continue to include the extended family network that Charles's reign has placed within its orbit. That assumption has been addressed, not through a formal exclusion with a documented institutional basis, through the communication of expectations about how the space is used and whose children share it with William's children under what conditions. The Greenheath decision established that William was willing to use property arrangements to communicate institutional boundaries. The Balmoral decision extends that principle into territory that is more personal and more immediately connected to the specific event that prompted it. This is not an estate management decision. It is a parental decision expressed through institutional means. A father who heard something directed at his son and responded by ensuring that the conditions that produce that something are not replicated in the space where his children grow up. That combination of the personal and the institutional is the thing that makes William's Balmoral move different from his previous institutional assertions. Previous moves have been primarily about power, about the appropriate limits of Camilla's influence, and the appropriate boundaries of her family's accommodation within the royal orbit. This is about something more fundamental than power. It is about his children, the three people whose faces William carries with him through every institutional confrontation and every careful political calculation, and every managed distance he has maintained for years in the service of an institution that will eventually belong to them. George, Charlotte, Louis. The people for whom everything William is building is ultimately being built. The reasons the careful institutional work of the past year's worth of confrontations and refusals and shutdowns and exclusions is not simply about power, but about what kind of institution his children inherit and what kind of environment they grow up in. When someone says something to Louis at Balmoral that uses his position as a weapon, however imperfectly and however unconsciously, they have crossed into a territory that all of the institutional management and all of the political calculation has always been in the service of protecting. And William's response to that crossing is the clearest expression yet of what all of it has always been about. Not the crown, not the institution in the abstract. The children. What this changes. For Camilla, for the children, and for the monarchy's future. Some things change slowly inside a monarchy. Through the accumulation of small adjustments and quiet recalibrations and the gradual shifting of informal power that nobody announces and everybody notices. Through the particular patience of institutions that measure their continuity in centuries and understand that the most durable changes are the ones that arrive without declaring themselves. And then some things change in a single afternoon. In the late summer light at a Scottish estate. In the 60 seconds after a child says something to a 6-year-old boy and a father decides that the patience he has extended is no longer available in the form it previously took. Balmoral has changed. The change is not in the stone of the building or the grounds or the particular quality of the Scottish air that has drawn this family there for generations. It is in the authority that governs the space, in the understanding of who determines what happens within it, and on whose terms the people within it exist. That change has consequences that extend in every direction from the afternoon that produced it. For Camilla, the Balmoral development sits on top of everything that has preceded it with a specific and additional weight. Because what William has done at Balmoral is different in character from the previous institutional assertions that have marked this year's events. The confrontations about her palace plan, the refusal of her demand, the exclusion from the royal event, the removal of her family from Greenheath, all of those operated in the space of institutional politics, of the appropriate limits of her formal role and the informal influence she has been seeking to extend beyond those limits. The Balmoral decision operates in a different space entirely. It operates in the space of her family, her grandson, the specific child whose words produced a response from William that used the estate's governance as its expression. And in operating there, it communicates something that the purely institutional confrontations have not. It communicates that William's tolerance is not just about institutional overreach. It is about his children, about the specific and non-negotiable space around George, Charlotte, and Louis that exists independently of any political calculation or institutional consideration. That does not bend to the managed surfaces of family diplomacy or the performed warmth of shared occasions. If the institutional confrontations were telling Camilla where the lines are around her formal role, the Balmoral decision is telling her where the lines are around something that matters to William, at a level below the institutional. Something that has no formal title and no constitutional position provides protection against crossing. His children are not available as collateral in the politics of succession and palace power. Their experiences, their emotional safety, the things said to them in the spaces where they are supposed to be most themselves. These are outside the territory of what any of the people navigating the institutional dynamics of the approaching transition have the standing to effect. Camilla has understood this. Sources describe her response to the Balmoral situation as characterized by the particular quality of someone confronting a dimension of her position's vulnerability that she did not fully account for in her previous calculations. The institutional confrontations were difficult, but they were navigable in the sense that they operated on terrain she understood and had tools for addressing. This is different terrain, and the tools that work on institutional territory do not translate here. For the children, for the next generation of royals who are growing up in the middle of this transition, the Balmoral incident and its aftermath communicates something about the world they inhabit that is both uncomfortable and clarifying. The comfortable version of the story of the monarchy's future is one where the next generation grows up in a unified family, where the complexities of the current configuration are managed successfully enough that the children of William and Catherine and the children adjacent to the family, through Camilla's connections, develop the kind of relationships that make the institution's future less fractured than its present. The Balmoral incident suggests that a comfortable version requires conditions that do not currently exist, that the attitudes in circulation among the adults of one part of the family are reaching the children of that part in ways that are then expressed in interactions with the children of the Wales household, and that those expressions are not minor enough to be absorbed as normal childhood friction. They are reflective enough of the adult dynamics around them to require the adult response they received. For the monarchy's future, the picture this story draws is one of an institution whose next chapter is being shaped with an intentionality and a personal investment that goes deeper than political calculation. William is not just building a monarchy, he is building a world for his children, and the two projects, which might in other circumstances be separable, have become in the specific circumstances of the current transition completely intertwined. Every institutional boundary he draws, every informal accommodation he ends, every arrangement he refuses to carry forward from the configuration of his father's reign. These are simultaneously acts of a future king, defining the character of his institution, and acts of a father's defining the character of the environment his children will grow up in and eventually inherit. The monarchy that George will one day lead is being shaped now, in confrontations and refusals and institutional assertions and Balmoral decisions that each contribute to the structure of what he receives when the time comes. George will receive a monarchy whose informal power has been recalibrated around his family, whose accommodations reflect the priorities of his parents rather than the accommodations of the reign that preceded theirs, whose Balmoral summers are defined by the authority his father established over them. Charlotte will receive it. Louis will receive it. The children who were on those grounds that afternoon, in the late summer light that goes long and golden in the Scottish August, are the reason all of it is being built. And the future king who heard what was said to his youngest son and decided that 60 seconds was all the patience he had left. He was not just responding to a child's words, he was drawing the borders of the world his children will live in. And at Balmoral, in the estate that has always been where this family is most itself, those borders have just been drawn more clearly than anywhere else. The late summer light is still falling across Balmoral the same way it always has, long, golden, quiet in the way that only Scotland manages. But the estate that exists beneath that light is not the same estate it was before that afternoon. Before those words, before a father stopped choosing the institution over instinct and let both speak at once. William did not make a speech. He did not need to. He protected his son. And then he made sure the space where it happened belonged, in every way that matters, to his children's future. The monarchy his children inherit is already being built. You are watching it happen.